I'm going to go ahead and kick things off then. Thank you, everybody, for joining. This is our series we're calling the Buyer's Blueprint. So if you missed our first one with Eric at Fine Fettle, go check us out on LinkedIn. Check out our website. We've posted a lot of different clips from it, as well as the full recording for people who attended. We're able to get access to, just like you attending now, we'll get access to this full recording when we're done. And then we'll release clips of some of the great wisdom that Andrew Rodriguez is going to share with us today. So if you did not get a chance to see Eric's Buyer's Blueprint episode with us last month, highly recommend checking out the content from that. He's incredible at what he knows and what he does, and the insights he shared with us were just deep, right? Like the kind of conversations you don't see happening in the cannabis industry when it comes to retail cannabis buying. And thankfully, during that webinar, we got some really great input from our current guest, Andrew Rodriguez. So I expect we're going to have an equally deep and equally in the weeds conversation today about all the intricacies of what it means to handle purchasing, handle buying, inventory management at the retail level, some of the tips and tricks Andrew uses to sort of navigate the insanity, how he puts together and or tries to get away from spreadsheets during all of this process. And hopefully, you know, all you retail buyers out there who are watching will get some good tips and tricks from this. So without further ado, I want to welcome Andrew Rodriguez with Sonoran Roots and Ponderosa Dispensaries out in Arizona. Thanks for joining, Andrew.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely. So Andrew Watson and Andrew Rodriguez, the two Andrews, are going to hash it out. At the end of the main discussion period, we're going to have a Q&A. So if you have any questions that you would like us to answer at any point in time, you can use the little QA button down in your toolbar of Zoom. It's got the little question mark. And you can ask us any questions you like. Actually, I think that's how you do it. You can also just drop them in chat. So anywhere that you want to ask us questions, I will be paying attention. I'll make sure at the end we pop back on, answer all those questions as much as we possibly can, as much as time allows, and then we'll let you go for the day. So I'm going to let Andrew and Andrew hash it out now. You guys take it from here.
Thanks so much, Brad. Hey, Andrew, how's it going?
It's going good, Andrew. How you doing? Hey,
Good.
by the way, you can call me Drew. You don't have to call me Andrew.
Oh, okay, Drew.
Get it all
That'll be
swapped.
good. We'll make sure that we don't get it too messed up.
No, for sure. It's kind of weird saying your own name, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you for taking the time today, talking to myself, talking to the folks about your like incredible experience that you've been having over at Sonoran Roots, and just like all the insights you bring to the purchasing role and all of that. And I want to kind of tee us up there and kind of get into all of that. But I also always want to start this off with a little bit about you, right? So I'm interested, take a second to tell, how did you get into cannabis retail purchasing overall? Where'd you come from? And then we'll kind of dive in from there.
Sweet, man. Well, first and foremost, it starts off with, my college days. And, I was originally going to college at Chandler Gilbert Community College here in Arizona. And, I was going to school for finance and logistics at the time. I was working part-time at Oso Brewery in 2020, and then COVID happened for me. And, they let me go. I was collecting the unemployment, and my girlfriend's sister started working at Sonoran Roots, and, was like, hey, we're hiring for trimmers. And I was like, went on YouTube really quickly, looked at a video for trimming, and I was like, not for me. Honestly, it's too meticulous. I'm going to get arthritis in my hands. Like, that's not something I could do for 8 hours. And she calls me back a month later and was like, we're hiring for packaging. So that was pretty much my entrance into cannabis altogether. And then, I started with Sonoran Roots with 50 employees originally, bumping elbows with my ownership group, Jeremy Basha, Michael O'Brien, Amanda Darling, some of the greatest people I've been around. And, they've provided a lot of opportunity for myself and a lot of the members of the teams from very early on. And so originally my ownership group was taking a lot of the deliveries, and I was just like, hey guys, you guys are owners. You don't necessarily need to be doing that. So just kind of started climbing the ranks from packaging to sales and packaging to, account managing, and then just jumping into the sales realm as the years progressed. And then I was doing very well in sales, and my boss now, Kyle Loriano, had reached out to me and was like, look, I need help, we're expanding our retail footprint here in the state of Arizona, and there's no other person that I would rather have on my team than you. And I played football my entire life, and I've been
Yeah.
recruited. And so I was just like, sign me up. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's kind of how I entered into, the procurement realm, doing the ordering and, getting my feet wet. And I already had a wealth of knowledge just coming from the sales realm and just understanding the dynamic of the Arizona market. So it was very beneficial getting into the procurement role because I already related with a lot of the products. I was already working with a lot of the salesmen in the market. So I already kind of had a leg up on most people because the fast track into procurement is kind of working at retails, getting
Yeah.
the inventory, understanding the inventory processes, and kind of just going from there. So
Yeah.
for
So
me, different steps.
yeah, so you came into the role then a little bit with like a little bit, and we'll talk about this in a second, but like the vendor management aspect because as a seller. So, well, actually, and to that point, what I think would be helpful is talk about a little bit about Sonoran Roots, the makeup, right? So vertical integrated, how many locations, you got the wholesale, you got the grow, you got the retail arm. Just give us a little bit of an overview of Sonoran Roots and Ponderosa at large for everyone.
Absolutely. And Sonoran Roots and Ponderosa and Cannamo concentrates all falls under the same conglomerate. Sonoran Roots being the umbrella company, kind of working its way down to Ponderosa and Cannamo. And so basically we have 7 retail locations. I don't want to say we're 100% vertical. I would say we're probably 80-20. Our Sonoran Roots and Cannamo brands have practically 99% market penetration in the Arizona market. And so a lot of that product we will vertical integrate, but like I said, we have 99% market penetration for the Sonoran Roots and Cannabis side of things. So it's, we definitely work together. We all work, as a team, and we try to work towards one goal, and it's really driving the maximum amount of revenue for the company as a whole.
Yeah. And you said so 7 locations currently, is that correct?
Correct. 7 locations right now. And
And does
that's,
that include you guys just pulled off of acquisition some new retail locations, right?
yeah, basically. So we recently acquired, 3 new locations from a national company called Ianthus. And so we had 4 locations, one in North Arizona called in Flagstaff. We had another one in South Arizona, Tucson, and then we have 2 dispensaries up here in the valley that are kind of divided, one covering the east side, one covering the west side. And so with that acquisition, we now have 3 new locations in the East Arizona region, and that's going to fall in Mesa, the Phoenix location, as well as Queen Creek. So we now have practically total coverage of the entire state without having multiple, 10 plus locations, right?
Yeah. And then yourself, and then talk to me about the team who handles for all of those locations with you have the house brand. How many folks are involved in that procurement process right now?
So originally it was just me and Kyle Loriano, and I was managing all 4 locations. I was able to do all of the ordering on one day using Happy Cabbage software. It's super intuitive. It's a very great tool to use with the purchasing day-to-day stuff. It definitely frees up time for us, but yeah, we recently expanded our team with the new acquired locations because they had 2 guys doing the purchasing over there. One guy named Mike Montesano, the other dude named Mike Trong, and they're a great addition to the team. And so they're going to be taking off a lot of the day-to-day tasks off of my plate and allowing me to elevate a little bit more and focus on more retail strategies and
Yeah.
how we can create and generate more revenue, whether it's reciprocal deals, and just expanding on the cost and just working relationships with a lot of the vendors that we're currently working with.
Yeah. So actually, so let's get into that a little bit. And also, and part of this is like, establishing that kind of background for folks. So 7 locations, procurement, wholesale, Arizona, right? And so I think a lot of folks, I don't know how many Arizona folks we have in here, but give us just a really quick lay of the land of challenges when it comes to procurement in Arizona. Like Arizona is a more developed market, pricing compression? Like just give us a really quick, like, what are you dealing with in the market right now?
The market is tricky right now. I mean, at the moment, we chatted a little bit earlier, and we were talking about how we're limited on the amount of dispensaries that are here in the state, and I think we're pretty much capped out at roughly 170 licenses. So, the in terms of scarcity, in terms of compression, it's very tough. And so, we have a lot of competition here in the state, and it's there's it's primarily ran by a lot of MSOs. Jars is upwards to 14 locations. Trulieve is upwards to 18 plus locations. And so a lot of these guys, it creates a very difficult environment to work in. And at the end of the day, we got to team up with these guys. You got to work with them. So, going back to what I was talking about in terms of, having the retail and the wholesale aspect of the company, that kind of stems into reciprocation and the type of deals that we're working out with a lot of these people. So if you want to get entrance into a certain, MSO, to achieve that 99% or 100% market penetration, in turn, we have to bring on some of their products. And so that's kind of what's going on in the state of Arizona, is kind of like trades for shelf space, but understanding the velocity of some products. Some things are just slow movers, and there's some things that you need to go work out in those relationships to create a demand behind these products. And so it's very competitive. A lot of people, there's a lot of brands, a lot of different varieties, and it's very tough, honestly.
Yeah. Well, so let's double click there a little bit. You're talking, you do have limited licenses, but you also have a lot of volume being pushed. So you have price compression, you have competition. You mentioned MSOs. Let's talk a little. I'm going to double click there. You mentioned MSOs, mentions reciprocity. So a lot of folks deal with the concept of MSO penetration, reciprocity penetration. For those who are not familiar, that basically means, we sell a little bit of wholesale goods to them. They sell wholesale goods back to us. How do you, through the procurement mindset, though, help manage those kinds of relationships, right? How you deal with the fact that you have to be purchasing a certain amount back from them that you need to move through the stores with access to the data, with access to the tooling. Like, how do you engage in that? How do you make sure that you're actually getting the appropriate amount that you're turning over, so you're not dealing with issues where you've taken on more than you can actually push out the door on a reciprocal basis?
Right. And so it all begins with the initial order and the initial process, onboarding process with a lot of these guys. So it's understanding what you're getting yourself into, and understanding what we can do in terms of marketing and the promotional aspect to ensure that the products are moving at the end of the day. So I don't like to do business as in tick for tack, like, hey, you spend this, we spend this. I like to figure out what products work for me, and just trying to find holes within my online menu, or our menu in general, to ensure that the products that we're bringing on are going to move and they are going to have the demand. So initially it begins with not over ordering on the initial order. You start small, and then that's typically how I like to work it out. Over here at Ponderosa, we do kind of just in time ordering. We like to do weekly ordering just to ensure that we're not overstocking our shelves at the end of the day, and we're not overstocking any back stock. So for us, it's just with the initial order, initial marketing, initial, promotional pushes. I think that's going to set you up for success later down the road, and ultimately just maintaining the relationships with a lot of these guys, and making sure you're following up with them, and if you're having issues with product slowing down and not moving at the velocity that you're looking for, then it's just going back to the drawing board and ultimately working with these guys. And so yeah, there's tons of tools that we're utilizing to understand the brands that we're coming across. Like, I use tools like BDSA Analytics, Headset, and that helps me derive a decision on where these products are at in the market. Because you can go off your initial gut instinct, like, oh, I'm familiar with the products. I don't know, I'm not too sure, but taking a deeper dive into the analytics and understanding the cost and the pricing of these brands, and where their average unit price lies, and that's the average unit sale price. So it's like, okay, well, if these guys are coming in, they're priced high, but you're looking at BDSA analytics and it's telling you these guys move at this price point. They will always move at this price point. So it's just figuring out how often we can get that price point on the menu without hurting the customer, without hurting the vendor and their brand by over discounting and doing things of that nature. Because realistically, you want product to move organically, but here in Arizona, organic sales is it's not a thing. You know what I mean? It's just it's frustrating because if you have organic sales as a brand, you're doing something right and you left a mark on the consumer, and they're just always going to naturally gravitate towards your guys' brand because it's trusted, they're loyal. I would say there's probably 5 brands that are like that in the state.
Yeah, yeah.
Other than that, everything is just moving on promo.
And so in that case, then when you're working with, right, these other wholesalers, when you're working with the vendors and stuff like that, once it's on the shelf, so you made the selection process, you said, hey, based on some market data, based on relationship, that once it's on the shelves, what are you doing in order to, one, maintain velocity of the thing, 2, protect your margin on the thing, and then 3, manage their expectation of how much you should actually order on a consistent basis and turn over on a consistent basis?
And it goes back to the tools that we're utilizing. So, Happy Buyer does a very good job in terms of, providing run rates and how quickly these products are moving. And so typically I'm taking a deeper dive and looking at the analytics of each of these brands that we're carrying and ensuring that they're moving. If they're not, then it's just, going back to the drawing board and ensuring that the product is going to move with some velocity and, getting promotions that are approved with the vendor to like whether it's a velocity type of promotion like a BOGO or 50% off, but just making sure that you're keeping the lines of communication open, and last thing you want is just to have products sitting on your shelves not moving, and then 30 days go by and you're putting it on an aged inventory, or you're putting it on an aged inventory sale and just trying to ensure that it's getting out of the system and you're turning over to make sure that you're making the money to pay for that invoice, because we're all on 30-day terms at the end of the day, and you want that inventory to turn over. And that's kind of where I'm at.
To that point, and we hear so many different people have so many different perspectives on this. When you're like, that thing isn't moving, right? When you're talking about it needs to turn over, what is the time window you're talking about? Is it 30, 20, 14 days? Like, what is the time window you're always targeting to turn over?
I typically target 21 days, because I typically order 14 days on hand. And, if it's not moving within that additional 7 days, then it's kind of like an indicator to me, like, hey, we need to go back, reach out to these guys just to ensure that the product is moving. So I like to give it the first 30 days, up 21 to 30 days, just to ensure that it is turning over. And, some products like topicals, they're just going to sit a little longer than most because it's a very niche product and a lot of people aren't coming in looking for that category.
Yeah,
got it.
How do you rationalize how many, just off on the side, like how do you decide then how much topicals you want to have? Is it so that you have enough variation to be competitive on the menu? Is it so that you just have something? Like, how do you normally come up with that order then?
Typically, when it comes to the topical SKU in particular, I'll be totally transparent with you. It makes up probably 0.2% of all of my sales.
Yeah.
So just in terms of rationale and understanding, you don't want to overstock that product because knowing that the product's not going to turn over within, 14, 30, 90 days, I would have to carry 5 units on the initial order to ensure that it's going to turn over within the first 30 days. So realistically, I order pretty much a 90-day supply and just let it ride.
Yeah.
It's just one of those products that you have to have it on your shelf in case someone's coming and looking for it. So in terms of, varieties and brands, typically I like to work with 1 or 2.
Yeah,
That's where I'm at. And then as far as SKU count and the breakdown of those SKUs, I'm at 3. I take a deeper dive into their catalog and see, what are the top movers, and then it's going back to that brand and really asking them like, hey, what are your top movers? And then taking that information that they give you and going back and cross-referencing with the analytics that through BDSA and through, some of these other softwares that you can use to derive, how a brand's performing within the state.
Yeah, well, 100%. So then let's talk about when it doesn't turn over. So outside of the topicals, outside the fringe ones, let's talk about that fire flower. And you kind of mentioned like, you're in Happy Buyers, you're seeing that this new thing is not turning over within 30 days after you had this whole conversation. So what I want to first start off with is how and when are you communicating with the wholesaler in terms of how they can help and contribute to moving it over? Talk to me through that. And then I want to talk about how you've structured ways to make sure that you guys aren't left too much on the hook when you're coming back on that 30-day mark. So first start with like, talk me through that conversation, that evaluation process in terms of what happens when you're dealing with a situation like that.
Yeah, so initially when you're dealing with a situation like that, you typically want to be as transparent as possible. And what I do is I provide the statistics, I provide the analytics behind the decision and the rationale, if the product is not moving. And then ultimately it's going back to the drawing boards and creating it's asking for a little bit more, right? It's, hey, what can you guys do in terms of marketing? What can you guys do in terms of bud tender incentives for my bud tenders to be able to push the products that you guys are offering at our locations, right? Because it's your job as the vendor to ensure that your guys' product is moving on our shelves. And so that's ultimately, what we do is we go back to the drawing boards, get additional marketing spend to ensure that the product has the visibility and it's being communicated to the community and the audience that they're trying to target. And then two, it's getting in-store marketing, whether it's displays, whether it's, having a field marketing rep within the store, kind of just talking to the customers and educating them. So, there's definitely lines of defense before it comes to cutting a product that we want to ensure is being hit. Where, if a company's not coming in too hot with all of these strategies, then it's like, hey, what can you guys do with the marketing side? What can you guys do here? And then, ultimately just creating a solid game plan to ensure that the brand is going to move on our shelves.
And how many days in, if you're trying to turn it over within 30 and you're looking in, you're seeing it's still not turning within 30, the run rate's dropping, right? It's starting to show up into predicted days on hand is getting into the 90s, into the hundreds. At what point in time are you making that kind of first order decision? How many days into it coming onto the shelf normally?
I mean, so it's very tough to evaluate that. It's not tough. So I like to give brands a quarter for performance. That's where I'm at. And then it's like, if I'm not seeing the indicators and say, it's a very hot brand and it's something that's moving with velocity at every other location, but it's not working for us, I need to figure out like, okay, this brand is performing, top 5 in the state. How do we ensure that it's moving on our shelves? So it's like, how can we communicate to our customers that this is something that's really good, it's a solid product, and it's priced, accordingly, and how do we, basically it's just working with the vendor and ensuring that we're coming up with a solid game plan to ensure that their product's going to move. That's really what it is. And so within that first 30 days, if it's not moving within the first 2 weeks, the first 21 days, then it's ultimately saying, hey guys, what you guys have isn't working for us.
Yeah.
It's not working.
Yeah.
What can we do? And that's kind of how those conversations are going, because it's like, there's 1,000 different brands, or not 1,000, but there's tons of brands in the market that are chomping at the bits to get their opportunity on someone's shelf. So it's like, at the end of the day, you got to figure out what's working for us. And if it doesn't, if you don't figure that out in time, then it's like, okay, well, we may need to look elsewhere.
Got it. And then how do you protect yourselves from holding the bag at the end of the day?
How do we protect ourselves? What'd you say?
In terms of like, when a brand new thing comes in and they're still coming back net 30 and they're saying, well, we need to get paid back now, right? How are you structuring it so that you can protect yourselves?
Yeah, and that kind of goes into the margin protection aspect of things too, though. So it's like, that's one thing that we do within the Arizona market to ensure that we are protected at the end of the day. So it's like, every unit that we're moving, we are protected on the back end at the end of the month to ensure that we're making a profit that we need that we need. And so ultimately, you know, if a brand, if we haven't turned over their product within 30 days, then we're going back to them and we're trying to figure out like, hey, we're not going to get you, we're not going to get an additional order going unless, you know, we figure something out. That's ultimately how we're protecting ourselves, is not over ordering on the products and just ensuring that we're selling through it completely.
Got
And
it.
you know, we typically don't let things get to that point. So initially, I've never came across an issue where it's like, you know, product not turning over within the first 30 days, because we're ordering accordingly. Like I said, especially using, you know, your guys' software and, you know, having processes in place that ensure that we're not over ordering with, you know, initial brands that are new for two Ponderosa locations.
Yeah, actually, there's a relative thing here. Someone just dropped this in, but question there, if you could just explain to folks with a bunch of locations and only a couple people monitoring it. Some folks are always understanding, well, how do you figure out how much you need at every single location? Really quickly type of stuff. But I just kind of talk through there on that like base level process while you're trying to decide, oh, this location needs this much, this needs that much, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and so for me, it's just understanding foot traffic and demand at the location. So understanding how. So let me back it up a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, I have internal meetings with all of my staff. I sit down with inventory, you know, on a weekly basis. I sit down with the retail GMs on a weekly basis and understanding, you know, how things are moving. So it's just, you know, making sure, especially with like initial, like, sorry, I'm getting myself tripped up real
No,
quick.
you're totally go. With an initial buy, it's just making sure that you're like, you're using the data, you're logging into the tool, you're seeing like how much are you actually reasonably turning over, what's the
Yeah,
relative rates of these things, and you're not basically just blowing it out, being like, you know, because oftentimes that's, you know, that's kind of what happens, right? Folks decide to bring in something new. If they have too many stores, they've scaled too much, they don't have processes set up to monitor how much is actually selling through actually on a store by store basis, and they're just getting the buy wrong. Right.
initially, yeah. And
Yeah.
it all starts off with the initial order and understanding the demand per location, you know, understanding your demographic at each geographic location that we're working with. So, you know, understanding that I have a store in Flagstaff, it doesn't slow down, you know, because it gets hot here in the valley. And what do people like to do? They go up north. You know, during the fall, the winter season, the seasonality of things, you know, they have a bunch of students up north. So it's like, that does not skip a beat. And understanding, since it is cold outside, people aren't combusting flower within their homes. And it's understanding like a lot of them are vapors. So vape category grows a little bit more. A lot of these are college students and they're eating edibles because they don't want the smell associated with them. So the edible category grows. And it's just ultimately understanding the demand at each location, the demographic as well as the geographic. That's what it comes down to, and not over ordering, you know, testing things out with, you know, one case pack initially, two case packs. You know, it's you don't ever want to put yourself in a bad position to where you're sitting on inventory at the end of the day. You want this stuff turned over. And like I said, we established some great processes over here at Ponderosa to ensure that we're not putting ourselves in a bad spot and we're not sitting on dead inventory at the end of the day. So it comes down to the initial order and understanding your guys' locations, and it takes a little bit of the analytics, the intuition, I would say, and then just understanding what the market is doing as a whole.
Got it. And so on a buy in general, how much, what is that total dollar margin that you're trying to get normally?
For the initial buy, it comes down to the brand. It comes down to, you know, what kind of deal it is. You know, is it going to be a reciprocal type of deal? So, you know, if it's something that I don't feel confident about and the data is telling me it's not a strong product, it's not going to exceed, you know, a $2,000 spend.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? For an initial order, say if it's pre-rolls or, you know, a pre-packaged good, you know, you don't want to put yourself in a bad spot. Again.
And would you rather, when you're doing something like that, I'm curious, spread that out across all 7 stores to see, or would you rather test it in like a couple set of stores for an initial val?
So initially, with us, we bring it on at all locations. We typically don't like to test things out because we centralized a lot of things on our end in terms of discounting, centralizing, a lot of the naming conventions. And so, if we're running one promotion in Flagstaff, we're running the same exact promotion down in Tucson. And so typically we don't give trial runs. If the trial run's going to be implemented, it's going to be implemented across all locations for us. And then that's typically how we like to do it. And then it comes down to the capacity within inventory. How is the vault? Do we have space? Do we have floor space for these things? And so we factor everything into this, for menu planning to ensure that our inventory teams are able to stock the floor and that it's not, super compressed within the shop and they could only floor a couple strains at a time, or, couple edible options or vape options. So realistically, it's working with the teams that it's working with the retail teams and understanding what are they capable of having at each location, because we have tons of SKUs. That's what we're working on, and we're just returning over a lot of these different SKUs based off of reciprocal deals. And yeah, it primarily comes down to like for example, my Glendale location and my Flagstaff location, say we're bringing on a brand new vape company and they're all in ones and there's indica, hybrid, sativa. I don't want to put myself in a bad spot, but I want to create variety for the customers. So let's just initially do a case pack of two different strains per category. But keep in mind, Florence or Tucson, their foot traffic is not the greatest. It's a newly acquired location, newly established for us, and you don't want to overstock them. So and it's in a geographic location, a low income area, and so what they're looking for may not be this vape, right? And so it's understanding, dialing back, how many different strains you're gonna have for each dominance. So it's just understanding those things.
And I think it's also like what you're saying is like, don't be afraid to start slow. Don't be afraid to start small, right? Because the thing that is the worst thing at the end of the day is dollars sitting around that aren't sold, right? Even though like, you guys have a really solid way of protecting your bottom line with margin protection deals. It sounds like you're doing a really great job through the levers of reciprocity, through the levers that you have with dealing with vendors and setting these like expectations very clearly out the gate, right? Product on the back shelf is not good for anything. And so like being able to say, let's start small, see if it goes, do it quickly from there, I think it's really smart, right? And we run into all the time issues where, why is this store so overstocked? Well, it's because like we did a lot of big buys on new brands, but like, they never ended up selling or stuff like that. Yeah. And I'm interested, one thing we also get is how do you find the time, right? Like you're a very strategic buyer. You're thinking really strategically about the Arizona market. To your point, you're dealing with price compression. You're dealing with aggressive, just a consumer base that needs to deal with discounting and stuff, which gets you talking to, dealing with vendors, all that. We hear all the time, at the end of the day, we're just bogged down in trying to even figure out the initial order. By the end of the week, once we've figured out the initial orders, we don't have time for dealing with all the vendors and all this stuff and thinking strategically. So how do you find the time? How do you structure the ability to get that and get those conversations going?
You make time. And well, I mean, great tools like Happy Buyer, that breaks down the amount of time that you're spending on the purchasing aspect of the job. And really the job takes place in lunch meetings. The job takes place over emails. And if you're constantly, placing orders, or you're spending majority of your time, in spreadsheets and pivot tables, it's gonna slow you down in terms of understanding the market and understanding how quickly it's moving. And so you cannot miss that. You can't.
Yeah.
And then
that's actually that's actually a great question. What do you think is the most important part of a buyer's role?
I think the most important thing in the buyer's role is being, wearing multiple hats and working with everybody. I think that's what it comes down to. And it's understanding every aspect of the business and where we can make money.
Yeah.
It breaks down to, we were talking about it earlier, and, in Arizona, the license comes with 5 attachments. It comes with, a retail, it comes with an on-site, off-site cultivation, it comes with an extraction lab, and then it comes with an edible kitchen. So understanding you can make money off of all of these passively by leasing space out. So it's working strategic deals with vendors like, hey, it's just being able to understand that what we do directly impacts the revenue of the business, whether it's growing the relationship, getting free units on the next order, and we can mark those up 100%. It's just, figuring out what the company needs and moving in that direction. So, it goes back to just being the catch-22 for everything.
Yeah.
We're setting the promotions. And I think the biggest thing is what we do directly impacts the bottom line revenue of the company. And it's the inventory, the cash that's tied up in back rooms, the cash that's tied up at distribution hubs, and understanding that you don't want to be tied up in any of that. You want your products moving. You want to have healthy, very healthy inventory levels. And if you don't, then, you gotta create the promotions now. Now you're
Yeah.
doing marketing. And
Yeah.
now you're slating everything, and you're ensuring that the product is always moving and the company is always making money. And then, I mean, the biggest aspect is just over communicating with everybody, and knowing that what you do directly impacts the revenue. And it's just being very vocal about everything and working with your vendors. I think that's what it comes down to, being in
Well,
this.
I think what you did made a great statement earlier, which was like, you could have a vendor's marketing team talk to the retail marketing team and come out with a great marketing plan. But unless the buyer is the one deciding to make sure that there is inventory on the shelf to even move, let alone the fact that like the thing that causes most of those like near term needs from a marketing perspective are turning over inventory, right? Like the buyer is really sitting at the nexus of the entire lifeblood of the business, right? The cash flow of the business, right? Ultimately, if there are no objects on the shelves to sell, ultimately, if the customers are not coming in the door and are not seeing things to buy. And then I also think it's just really interesting you're talking about then even further assets, right? When you're thinking of, I do think some of that's unique to Arizona in terms of the different real estate that you have available. But I do think like more and more nationally, you have the folks who have the wholesale. Maybe it's just a small flower grow. Maybe it's something large, and talking about how you can leverage branding and all this kinds of stuff. But since you're the buyer, you can literally make the decision of, well, this is how much we're going to bring in. We're going to work out this deal with these folks. They're going to leverage some of our flour for that. And then I know the exact amount that we need to bring in to see if it's going to work to move the cash flow, the business, right? Like
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head right there. And that's exactly how the business is being discussed. And yeah, you're right.
Yeah. We're getting a little bit to the point where I'm going to start opening up for Q&A, but I thought I would ask just a couple last minute kind of questions. So what is your advice for new buyers in cannabis, right? I do think every market, if it's not dealing with price competition and price wars now, will in the next 6 months. I think that everyone's focused on how they make their retail shops cash flow positive, right? Everyone's dealing with the competitive elements. Someone who's brand new or someone who just came up as a bud tender, right? Or, like yourself, right? Just came in from the wholesale side or something like that. Like, what advice would you give them start off with in the role?
Be open and transparent with everybody. Make sure that your relationships are strong with all of your vendors, because at the end of the day, you never know what's going to happen. You might be in a pinch. You might have accidentally over ordered for 420 that's coming up, and now you need to liquidate through a lot of this inventory. So one, I would say being transparent, open with the people that you're working with in terms of all of the third vendors, and then understanding the market as a whole. understanding, the price compression, understanding and utilizing a lot of the tools that you have readily available for you to make educated and rational decisions. Because at the end of the day, we're playing with hundreds, millions of dollars.
A
And
lot of money.
yeah, we're responsible of a lot of money, and we're responsible of having that product turn over. So just, that's my biggest advice is,
Yeah.
think rationally, be open and honest with all of your vendors, be transparent, because, you may love somebody, but their product's terrible. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You got to break up with them eventually, right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of how it goes. And then, yeah, I would say those are the two things that I really would
Yeah.
advise. And then start slow. Don't bite off don't bite off too much that you can't chew.
Yeah.
Sometimes your eyes get bigger than your stomach, and you're like, oh wow, Jeter is amazing. Like, I'm gonna place an enormous order because they're one of the best brands, and you don't want to put yourself in a bad spot. So
Yeah. 100%.
understanding what your company policies are, understanding how much inventory you could have on hand, I think that's the biggest thing. And then operating within those parameters that have been set by the company. So
yeah. In your own role and with Sonoran Roots and where you folks are going, you're expanding. You just said you're bringing on some new folks to kind of help with some of the day-to-day procurement tasks and stuff. Where are you excited? What opportunities are you excited for, and where you're taking this?
just kind of overseeing, as I'm, getting more into an elevated role over here at Ponderosa. I think the biggest thing for me is getting more into the strategic planning side of things, getting more into the demand analysis, and understanding, tying goals to the procurement department, tying net revenue goals, and breaking them on a monthly basis. I think that's the biggest thing. And, ultimately contributing to the bottom line of the company, because that's what we're all here for. We're here to make money.
Yeah.
That's really what it is. And so, yeah, I would say, getting more into an elevated role, and start, creating strategies for the company to move, and sleeping giant in the Arizona market.
Yeah. I think one thing you just said, which I think is a very novel, simple concept, but tying revenue goals to the procurement side of the house, right? A lot of folks just think of it as like, job of scanning things into metric, right? As opposed to like an actual revenue generating, like sort of type of thing. And I think that's super exciting. I think you're looking at it in such a way that I think is necessary for cannabis businesses to survive and scale, right? And that's what's so important, right? So
Absolutely. And yeah, that's how we look at it. I mean, it's a business. It's ultimately, we are no different than any other traditional business.
Yeah.
Every other business has, demand planning, merchandise planning, and all of these, things associated with it. And we're in such a brand new industry that, we could bring a lot of that stuff into this fold.
Exactly.
And start implementing a lot of these processes that we see in other industries.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Awesome. Well, for the last few minutes here, we're going to open it up to the audience for a little Q&A. Thank you, Andrew. And what do we got, Brad? What's going on?
Yeah, well, we got a number of questions in. Thank you, everybody. And if you have more, feel free to hit us with it. If we've got time, we'll try to get to it. But we've got a few already. Actually, we got two questions that are pretty well related, so I might as well just ask you them both at the same time. I know I can say this and no one's going to believe me. Literally nobody was prompted to put this question in here, even though it's a layup for us. And I thank you for whoever wrote this. What are your most helpful software applications you use to make your job easier? I truly loathe spreadsheets and feel like there must be simpler ways to compile orders, especially when ordering for multiple stores. Also, which POS system are you using across your stores?
Oh, wow. So yeah, we utilize a software called Dutchie, and then we utilize Happy Buyer. I mean, that is the tool that I use. It's very premier, and it's amazing. I mean, it makes ordering a lot easier, and just taking deeper diagnosis into inventory and how well it's moving. So I would say those are the two tools that we use. And then just looking at markets as a whole, BDSA analytics is one tool that I take a deeper dive into, just to see brand performance in the market over the last year, over the last 3 months, 3 months to 6 months. I mean, I'm taking a deep dive in a lot of that stuff just to understand who is the top dog in the Arizona market. And then, Headset is a very similar tool that we utilize that's very similar to BDSA, but it just provides a little bit more in-depth stuff. So
Yeah. I assume you're also using Excel or Google Sheets as well, right? Like
that
we
was
haven't pulled you fully out of the spreadsheet yet, have we?
yeah, no, I would say I'm fully out of spreadsheets. I don't dabble in them at all
All right.
unless I'm sending over inventory reports to vendors so that they could take a deeper look into how inventory is moving. Because, like I said, open, honest transparency is the best way. And yeah, I'll export CSVs from Happy Buyer and then float them over to the vendor. If they're wanting to take a look at how well their product's moving within Ponderosa locations.
Wow.
Fantastic. Wow.
Yeah, no
I honestly didn't expect you to say that. I mean, like we have the mission of getting people off of spreadsheets, but like we expect like it's more like diminishing your time spent in them and the complexity of them rather than fully shedding them. But rock and roll, man.
I mean, the only spreadsheets that I'm sending out are my orders that I built out in the cart feature, So that's primarily
Dope.
I'm sending everything out, and if they want to take a deeper dive into inventory, then I'm exporting some stuff and getting it floated over to them. And then I do use Power BI within Dutchie software to generate additional reports just to take a look at. But outside of Excel or outside of Power BI, I don't play around with Excel too much. That was when I initially got into this role, and we didn't have Happy Buyer, and I was doing manual inputs, man. It was brutal for three locations, and we expanded to 4 locations. And prior to us bringing Happy Cabbage on and Happy Buyer software, I finally got ChatGPT to do everything for me. I was like, bless. And then Kyle hit me up and he was like, actually we got Happy Buyer now. And I was like, damn, okay. Well, I was able to get ChatGPT to do all the manual inputs for me. So
that's funny. Yeah. That's funny. All right, so here's another question. Are brands pressuring you to buy a lot of flavors or strains within their catalog rather than just like what you already know you want?
Yeah, I mean, they always do at the end of the day. I mean, they're salesmen, so they're going to push the entire catalog all day, every day. And for me, it's understanding the capacity of my shelves and how much I could, solely fit. So realistically, it's going back to the vendor and being transparent. Like, hey guys, I don't have enough room to fit all of your guys' stuff on my shelves. What are your guys' top movers? And maybe we could settle on those 3. Right.
Yeah.
And then it comes down to trying the product out, seeing what else they can do for us. Like as far as marketing, what are your capabilities there? Where are you guys at in terms of margin protection? Where are you guys at with, in-store, digital assets, marketing assets, everything, or do you guys train bud tenders? Are you going to ensure that the product's being sold? Are you going to provide bud tender incentives? So there's numerous things that are going into the decision making of bringing on, a brand's catalog, so to speak, right? And then, for me, it comes down to, if they're operating within our license, and I essentially, since we're doing business with, we're doing deeper business with these people, they're operating on our license, and we're vertically integrating their product with us, and we're helping them out in the wholesale market. We're going to gravitate towards, their entire catalog, and we're going to cater to them because we're doing business, on the back end as well. So
yeah, like truly partnered, right?
Yeah, we're truly partnered, and that's what I say is like we're partnered with all of these vendors that are operating on our shelves. We're working, immensely together. Whether it's marketing or everything.
Yeah, so the idea being here that like when a brand is trying to give you a really good like per unit discount if you buy the whole catalog, you're saying, yeah, that's fine. I'm looking at what my actual shelves need and what space I have and the capacity I have, and using that as like the most important metric with which you're calculating what to bring on. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I would say that, but then you're factoring in like the brand performance within the market. And it's all of these things at once. It's not just shelf space either. We'll make some stuff fit, depending on if you're a top 5 guy, right?
Well, actually, so I'll say I'll put you a little bit in the hot seat with that, right? So let's say they are the top 5 guy, right?
Yeah.
where in general are you willing to, because you're talking about, and I think you're spot on in terms of, you know, ideally if someone is the top five guy, they're coming in with an understanding of this is how they're doing BOGOs and this is their budtender promotions and this is where they're like, you know, understanding is we're good on the margin side that we can agree to.
Mhm.
Normally, where are you more willing to take risks for someone who is selling a ton but maybe doesn't have their stuff put together as well?
Emerging brands, it's like if you're hearing chatter, I jump in Reddit, guys. Like it's
Yeah.
understanding and realizing what the consumer is looking for. What are our bud tenders talking about? What are the customers that are buying the product talking about in Zona Ents? Because that's what we have. A lot of the cannabis industry is strong, and they go into the blogs and they talk about the products. So that's initially how we're deriving decisions, because I use Gruen as an example. They're a nationwide company, and when we recently acquired our Chandler location, all my bud tenders, Gruen, amazing, best brand ever. If they're behind that product and I know that they're going to sell it, I'm going to give them a shot. And that was a brand that we don't work with on the back end. It's solely organic. And I reached out to those guys like, hey, what kind of products do you guys offer? And then I tried the gummies myself, and I'm like, these things are going to take off because they're not using the pectin, and they're
Yep.
using Jello, or like the gummy texture, right? And so it's there's multiple factors that play into bringing on a brand organically, right?
Yeah. And I
You
think
probably
what you
made that brand rep's day, just like randomly getting a call from a retailer rather than having it the other way around. I don't have to go through a gatekeeper. What do you mean?
Yeah.
And I think what you're highlighting something that I'm coming aware of, which is also the fact that like because you have fairly robust systems and standards in place around turns over in less than 30 days, right? We know we just rip the needed order quantity out of Happy Buyers. We're studying the things on the market data sets. We have an expectation of knowing bud tender training, promo standards, margin protection. You have these structures in place. It almost frees you to do that experimentation, right? Because you know that running that experiment, right, won't throw off the entire business, right? Whereas so many folks, I do think, tend to do stuff by gut, which the whole business then is kind of getting thrown around with like, well, maybe this one will be hot, maybe that one will be hot, but you've almost like gotten all this time back to do that experimentation type of stuff because you already know what to expect on performance out the gate, basically.
Absolutely. And then, yeah, it definitely frees me up to do a lot more market discovery and see, who is doing what and who's making the ripples and the waves in the Arizona market. So, yeah, I mean, using the rationale and all of the tools and understanding a lot of the market from the bird's eye view definitely frees me up to start, taking deeper dives into newer brands, start having different discussions, evolving, seeing what we could do on the back end in terms of, business altogether. So, yeah, I've been freed up, and yeah, I explore a lot of these conversations, and I have weekly, daily meetings with new brands and seeing what they can provide to Ponderosa locations. So
Because we're on the topic, I got another layup question. And I swear to God, this is not being precipitated by us.
yeah.
But the question is just straight up, how much time does Happy Buyers save you a week? And what I really want to know is like, because you're talking about being freed up and you're talking about being able to play a little bit more and have better conversations and more relationship building stuff here, right? So like, I don't want to know necessarily just what the number is, but like, like what does that number represent for, the I guess the like higher level functions you can do in your role?
So to give you an example, when I was doing manual inputs, I wasn't finishing the ordering process for 4 locations until Thursday,
Oh,
like Wednesday being a great week, right?
Yeah.
So with Happy Buyer, I can get everything done on Monday.
hmm.
So I have the rest of the
Yep.
week to explore, go check out new products, go on tours at these new grows, sitting down with each individual team at my retail locations and taking a deeper dive with, hey, what products are moving? What are you guys seeing? What's the talk of the town? What's the chatter? Because when we're doing the buying, we're in our office. We're so tapped in, we're plugged in. to the data, to the analytics side of things, that we're not out in the field as much as we should be. So in terms of getting time back, I'm able to attend these meetings. I'm able to go out into the field. I'm able to work with a lot more people. I'm able to train up, the 2 new members on the team and make them autonomous and be able to go out and order comfortably. I think that's the biggest thing.
Order comfortably. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it feels like when I come in on Mondays, I get in at 6 o'clock so I could beat every other buyer and I get first dibs on everything. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Pro tip.
Yeah.
Big pro tip. That's a great.
Yeah, get in early. Get your orders placed, because you never know who's coming in and taking some of that market share.
Your 6 o'clock just became 4 a.m.
5:36, guys. Yeah. Yeah. And
amazing.
yeah.
So we got another question. I don't know how complicated of a question this is, because I can't tell you that I fully understand the concepts here behind this. I'm not a retail buyer, but one person wrote, Drew mentioned just-in-time inventory. Why not push it further and rent shelf space and flip the responsibilities?
That is so unique. That is very unique.
It felt like one of those questions that I was like, I wonder where this might go.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I have not heard and I have not explored. So and it's very unique. I mean, we are just in time ordering just to ensure that we're not overstocked ever across all locations. But to understand, I see problems going into that. You know what I mean? With space
incentives.
Exactly. So now it's like, okay, if I'm going to be able to sell you space on my shelf and you could buy, this real estate, what are you going to do outside of that to ensure the product is moving? It goes back to like, what kind of brand it is, who are they, and understanding the promotional cadence and everything that they can provide for you.
Yeah. It's almost like, because you have the wholesale lever and you have the ability to do that, getting them upstream in that partnership upstream locks it in a little bit better than just simply, hey, here, you can, dump, because, it's giving away a lot of control.
It goes back to reciprocation, though. That's basically what that is. That's basically what
it's just a different form of reciprocation, right? Yeah,
exactly. Instead of my wholesale team getting onto your guys' shelves, maybe it's interesting to see how that works, and how I see other brands can reciprocate by procuring oil in turn for shelf space, right? And realistically, it comes down to how much net revenue dollars are we making on the back end with this business, because we're going to be selling it at the retail as well as selling them bulk flour or bulk flour, bulk oil, bulk whatever on the back end to ensure that they can get the spot on the shelf. So for me, it's financially, does it make sense?
Yeah, we had Arizona is not the only place that reciprocation is happening. It may be one of the few states where it's like happening everywhere across the state, like the norm. But we did have a customer we worked with in California, and what was interesting was they'd had one store that did rent shelf space and the other stores that didn't. And when you compared how they managed their inventory and how much of it was aging, the store that rented out shelf space had incredibly aging inventory and didn't feel very compelled to change that, right? Like because it was sort of like the responsibility was lifted. But I like what you said about, like, even if you're going to follow that model, like the responsibility of ensuring things are moving is still kind of incumbent on the retailer. Otherwise, you end up with a whole bunch of stuff everywhere that is old and, some of it's new, and like customers might feel a little weird about that, not knowing what is dependable that is on the shelf,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Well, I would just say, like, to that point, like, if you do confine it within the rule set, it has to turn over this amount, right? It can't be over this age, like all that. And, that is something, again, plug for happy buyers, like, standardized and stuff like that. But I do think, to that point, because we have seen it in some instances, like in Cali, and I've seen stores unfortunately go out of business because they didn't have control over what was going on essentially in the store.
Exactly. I mean, for me, it's grabbing the bull by the horns and ultimately, owning up to that process and ensuring that everything is working. You know, if that is the case, and you know, if that was the route that we're wanting to go in terms of offering shelf space for a monetary value, then it's, yeah, it goes back to the baseline rules of
Yeah.
moving and insuring. So, you know, if
Yeah.
that was an opportunity that we're wanting to explore, then, you know, we're going to make it very clear that if the product is not moving, then you guys, yeah, exactly. You know,
Yeah.
it's just,
Great.
That's right.
it's the name of the
Cool.
game, you know? For me, it's not just cutting brands and saying, hey, you know, we're not ever doing business again. You know, you never know, that brand might turn around in the next 2 months or 3 months. So I leave every door open. You never close any doors in terms of, you know, being a buyer, because that brand that didn't perform on your shelves is now performing 6 months, you know, down the road, because they figured things out. You know, they got a
Yeah.
marketing spend, they got all of these things. And so, you know, my biggest thing is, you know, don't burn bridges. At the end of the day, keep everything open and honest, and you know, people will respect you a lot more for that.
Yeah, 100%.
Because some people shy away from it, to be honest, guys.
Yeah.
I love
No
that.
doubt.
That's a great note to end on. We're at time. But
Absolutely.
that flew by. Wow, that was great.
Yeah, holy crap.
That was fast. I was over here on mute with my camera off, and before I knew it, we were getting into the QA. So, Yeah.
So I'll just leave this up here in case folks interested in learning more, connecting with Andrew. Andrew's contact information here, my contact info. If you're interested in learning more about Happy Buyers, go on the Happy Cabbage website. Andrew, thank you so much taking the time. You're a busy dude, clearly. But you know, I think awesome, like just really forward thinking vision of the role, vision of what you know a buyer should, can, and will be doing, right? To make these cannabis businesses, cannabis retailers thrive, right, in a challenging market, right? And so I just really appreciate you taking the time, kind of articulating that for folks, and yeah, appreciate it.
I wanted to add one little note here, which is like, you know, what's interesting to me about this whole conversation is that you are the assistant buyer at Sonoran, but like the way that you talk about the role and the various parts of the business that you're involved in, you sound almost like the most important person at the retail store. I mean, like you're having to focus on buying, you're having to focus on how it sells, you're having to focus in some ways on marketing and on like company strategy and growth strategy. Like it's a whole lot more than just like I need to put some numbers and some SKUs into a spreadsheet and send it on. And it's kind of incredible to me, just the more that we talk with buyers and roles like yours, the more it highlights how vitally, crucially important, like a linchpin, this role is. And in such a way that, like, if you looked at other industries, the role title might throw you and thinking that it's not really that big of an important position. But like without this position doing what you're doing, it feels like the retail store just starts to
Products don't get onto the shelves.
nor move off the shelves.
Yeah,
and
like...
marketing is just stuck selling overly discounted stuff into oblivion. Like it's just the whole thing feels like it just grinds to a halt. It's incredible how important this role is.
Yeah, you said it the best at the end of the day, Brad. I mean, we are the glue of the revenue. We are the glue of everything that is happening in terms of inventory, ensuring that we're making the money that we need to, and you know, ensuring that product is moving. So yeah, the sky's the limit for a procurement position, because we're touching so many aspects of the business, and you know, just staying on top of it. I think that's really what it comes down to, and you know, just you know, being the best that you can be in reality. Yeah. And utilizing the tools that we have available to us, like Happy Buyer and, you know, Happy Cabbage, to allow us to free up our time and really focus on growing the business elsewhere.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, guys. Sweet.
Right on. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining. We'll see you on the next Buyer's Blueprint.